All right, welcome back to another Serious Angler podcast. Hope everyone is having a good night. I'm your host, Bailey Eichbrett, and as always, joined by the captain, Mr. Andy Full. What's going on, dude?
Oh, not a whole lot. Pretty stoked about the weather forecast coming up here. It's trending warmer, and the satellite imagery proved Lake Erie is more open than I thought it would be at 80% ice coverage. So I think we might be able to get on pretty soon, like 4 or 5 weeks.
Fingers crossed. Heck yeah. The weather forecast is looking really good for me because primarily I'm heading south, but it's kind of keep me optimistic for when I get home. I can get on the water somewhere. But we'll figure it out.
When are you heading out? Thursday or Friday? Thursday,
I'm gonna
right?
At like Thursday at like 3:30 or 4 in the morning. I'm gonna try to get going as early as possible. I got to stop at Watts Bar because I bought a couple of rods from Destin. So I'm completing my arsenal. So I'm gonna scoop by his place that he's staying in Tennessee, pick up some rods, and then head back down to my hotel. Because Friday I'm meeting up with Mr. Caleb Bell from Bass Quest and Mr. Alex Rudd, and we're gonna go fishing out on either Chick or Watts. I haven't figured out where we're actually going yet. We just kind of had a group chat, and we're like, all right, where are we going fishing, boys? And
I'm super envious.
It's going to be a fun
up here in the snow, working my desk job, and Bailey's venturing the East Coast.
I'm still doing work when we get down there. So, but either way, it's going to be really exciting. I'm pretty pumped about it. Yeah, hopefully gonna get on some old bigs. That's gonna be.
I'm sure it's like almost prime time.
Yeah, I think we're hitting it pretty good. Weather forecast looks really good because it's not like this time of year you don't really want that sun, that nice weather. You want like some rain, overcast, so they'll chew, and that's what it looks like. So I'll have the Hydronaut suit on all week long.
Heck yeah.
I am pretty pumped about, and we're gonna be getting after it. But real quick, we have our first ever super sticker donation.
Zach, my man, Zach.
Throwing us a bone. At least now I can buy a water on the way down to Tennessee, so I appreciate it, buddy.
$1.99 special.
I can get a Pop-Tart at the gas station. You got me breakfast for Thursday. I'm just messing with you. Appreciate it. Zach's in the house. Zach's another smallie angler. Actually, up by right near Mr. Benjamin Nowak. Who
St. Clair low-key hammer. Didn't he win a BFL last summer and
crushed the boaters?
A bigger weight than all the boaters?
Yeah, I think he had like 4 more pounds than the boaters did. Like I think boaters 18, he had like 22 pounds. Yeah. The dude's a stud, and he's a name that people need to start getting familiar with.
Yeah, and he just took, third in the Hobie? Right?
Third in Hobie on Lake Seminole, first time ever being there, and I think the biggest accomplishment he's had in recent, he's having another kid. He just announced the other day he's going to be a father of 2. So congrats to him.
Solid fishing poles now, Zach.
He's talking about tournaments and everything, and I'm like, dude, you got a kid coming, man. But
see ya.
I'm just messing. He'll figure out a way. He's all around he's all over the place, but. I think without further ado, we're going to bring him back on because it has been a long time. Mr. Benjamin Nowak, what's going on, dude?
You're still muted.
You're muted.
Sorry, I was like, I don't want to not have this muted, and then we hop on. No, what's going on, dude?
Hey, not much. Man.
Come on, dude. You're a podcaster too. You should know the deal.
Yeah, I know, dude. It has been a long time. Last time I was on one of these, we did that smallmouth panel with like 6 guys on here, so it was a lot of fun. But super stoked to just hop on here, talk to you guys, or talk with you guys about some really cool spring techniques and summer techniques and kind of finesse stuff that get big fish to bite. So I'm excited.
Yeah. I mean, both techniques. I know we're going to go on we're probably going to go on many tangents tonight, but the two techniques predominantly we'll be talking about are stuff that I think a lot of people sleep on and are crazy fun, at least in my eyes, are crazy fun to fish because the bites are nutty. But
and they're kind of specific, man. They're kind of very specific bites, right? And like that's what gets. I don't know about you guys, but that's like what I like. I don't like just kind of casting and winding in the middle of no man's land and hope I get a bite. Like I want to have purpose, and I feel like both these techniques are purposeful techniques. So,
yeah, I think. The spy bait, obviously we're talking about spy baits and hair jigs, and I think the spy bait over the hair jig is a lot more versatile in the fact that you can be kind of creative with how you fish it. I think for what it's known now, it's predominantly a a shallow water, clear water bait. But I think there's some creative ways of like you can tight line it, which would be like a really like a sleeper way to fish that.
There's a lot of really cool things, man. Like I've just barely scraped the surface with the Spybait, like predominantly clear water technique when I'm trying to fish it over shallow flats, suspend it up. But like I played with bottom tracing. I played with some of these like where you reel it up and you get the bait to start to lift and then drop again, lift and drop it. So you can do a bunch of different things, but there's a lot of cool things we can talk about because there's.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you get the different sizes of them too. So you can throw them on casting or spinning gear and
so much that goes into it.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
I think one of the biggest debates with it is straight fluorocarbon or leader to, well, just like braid to fluorocarbon. And that's, no, actually, I think it's straight mono that guys throw on that.
Yeah,
right?
there's some guys that just throw straight mono. There's some guys that say, hey, just throw straight fluoro. And then you have the guys, I mean, there's guys all across the spectrum. My personal preference, and I guess we'll start by kind of starting to dive into the Spybait thing. But like my setup for a Spybait and my setup for a hair jig is almost identical in the sense that I'm throwing it on the same rod, reel, and line setup and overall leader. So I'm throwing it on a Temple Fork Outfitters walleye rod. It's a 7.6 medium light fast action. And I'll give you guys a hot take here in a little bit, but it's a $99 budget economy rod. But the biggest thing is like it doesn't have a really whippy tip. Like a lot of guys go out there and want this rod that's like super soft and crazy, but I think that actually takes away from a lot of what you're able to do with it, like the castability. Because when you go to cast, right, like if that tip keeps whipping, you're losing casting distance. Especially
so it's real snappy, is what you're saying.
Exactly. Like when it hits, it pretty much stops, right? So it loads up well, but when it comes forward, it's not like bouncing. It snaps forward. And so I'm a big fan of that rod. It's a $99 rod, but we're actually coming out with a new hair jig Spybait small swim bait rod at TFO that's going to be even more dialed in than that one is. So really, really cool things coming down the pipe there. And then reel I throw it on is a medium to high speed gear ratio. This is actually a 6-speed gear ratio reel. So I know a lot of people talk about fishing on a 5, like you can't fish it slow enough. I mean, man, if you're just barely creeping the handle, I think you're going to be pretty much fine. Yeah. 10 pound test braid or 8 if you want to go down that low. And then I fish both on 6 pound test fluorocarbon line. But the big thing here, man, the big thing that I do with both those techniques is I have a really long fluorocarbon leader, like a 30-foot leader. Basically what they call it, David Swanside calls it top shotting, but essentially what it is you get the benefit because the way that fluorocarbon comes off, a lot of times the reason that the cast gets really short when you have braid to fluoro is because you're not actually tend to see it hung up in the guides, right? So by having that top shot, the fluorocarbon can get the momentum to straighten out in the guides before that knot comes through. So you can actually cast it a little bit further than if you have a shorter leader. So that's kind of like my personal preference or like my biggest piece of advice for guys that want to go braid to fluoro is tie that top shot, super, super long leader. It's going to help with fish that might be line shy or kind of wary of the bite. And it's also going to help casting distance wise. And lighter line makes a huge, 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 like can't stress it enough difference. Like the difference between 15 pound test braid to like 10 or 8 is night and day.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, on my spinning reels, unless it's like a, grass and largemouth, I'm pretty much predominantly around 10 pound braid to like a 6 or an 8. And I go braid to fluorocarbon. I usually do like I haven't really played around with leader length much with spy baits. I usually just do kind of like a standard for me is where your hook keeper is on your rod back to your reel. That's kind of how I do it with leaders. But I like that braid to fluoro because I know a lot of guys throw that spy bait up shallow, but I like to kind of try to target suspended fish. I tried to experiment with it this summer with New York lakes. There's a lot of the smallmouth just chase throughout the summer months. So I try to find those fish and try to target them with that spy bait, something a little bit more finesse. And I feel like with that braid to fluoro, it's a little bit better of a hookup ratio. I don't know, at least with a mono, like especially if I'm bombed way, 50 yards out, like you can with that, like a 7'4", 7'6", if you have straight mono, I feel like you have a higher tendency you'll have a higher percentage of possibly losing that fish.
The other big thing too is with that longer leader, like when you hit them on braid, it actually almost acts as a shock absorber, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
by the time that you're getting to the point where just your fluorocarbon is in your reel, you're about ready to get ready to net that fish anyways. And so you get the ability to set the hook, move that hook a long ways with braid, but it's not quite as abrupt as if it's like a shorter leader. So
right. Yeah. Another point too, talking about that gear ratio, I like that. I think I have mine's like a 6.2 or 6.3 to 1. I prefer that, and I'm kind of that way across the board. Like even my cranking rods are sometimes I think they're like 6.8s, 6.8s, because like especially with smallmouth, I mean if I hook one deep on a spy bait and it comes they come shooting up, I mean you got to catch up to them, because if you knock any slack in that line, no bueno. So that's like my biggest fear is slower gear ratios because of that reason.
Well, like 100%, man. And I've played with some slow gear ratio reels, and I don't know that I've really noticed that big of a difference between like a slow gear ratio and the number of bites that I get as compared to like higher speed gear ratio. I think there is benefit to having like that 6 speed gear ratio reel to catch up to those fish that are surging towards you and just keep them connected, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
that
we can dive.
Rod's going to help too.
Exactly, dude. Exactly.
Yeah. And there's some good questions here too. Like Jacob Meeker is asking what kind of knot you use. I have become a believer in the FG. I don't know about both of you.
What do you throw, Andrew?
Was it the Alberto, I believe?
Yeah.
I'm terrible with knot names. It's just easier, it's quicker, it's more convenient for me. I can tie an Alberto knot in like 25 seconds, I feel like, where the FG I'm fumbling. I'm an old wrestler, so I have not the best movement in my fingers. So I've never truly had an issue with the Alberto with thinner braid and fluorocarbon diameters as I do when I'm like flipping braid to fluoro, so I can almost put it together a lot quicker. The big thing I have, one thing I used to do when I first started fishing was I would actually go backwards on it on accident, go fluoro over the braid, and I learned that was a no-no. And now that like 3 or 4 years ago, I was like, why the hell am I always breaking it in my knot? It was because I was doing it backwards, but that's just my own issues. So
yeah, man, I'm the same way, right? Like the ability to tie that knot so much faster. If it does get hung or it does wrap, because it's going to happen, that can tie it so much faster than something I'm not very confident in.
And the other thing is too that I've learned with the Alberto is if you do like the 10 to 12 to 15 wraps with it down and back up, you can almost elongate that knot out and still keep the strength of it too, so you can spread it out a little further.
With like more wraps is what you're saying?
Yeah. And you can almost make it thinner.
That's crazy. See,
yes,
I'm like a 7-8 wrap guy. Like I'm so OCD too, which doesn't help my situation at all. But like, it's 8 up and then 9, 10 by the time I get it through the loop, like my brain. So
I started going like 10 to 12 with it when I go down to 6-pound test. And if you slowly pull that knot together, you can almost elongate it out like the FG knot, and it comes through your guides better. But you just have to be careful how you do it, because if it's too elongated, you lose strength. But you can almost get it flat. You can almost get it flat on the line where you don't get that little bump.
Yeah, that little one. Yeah, I know what you're talking.
Yeah.
That's crazy, dude. I'm going to have to try that now.
So, yeah, sorry. You're going to make your OCD go nuts.
No,
kind of in line with that, too. Kind of in line with that, Shadow Baston said, with the trend towards microguides, wouldn't larger guides be an advantage for casting the knot more smoothly? Yes, but also I feel like if especially if you're going to have leader, 10-pound braid to 8-pound fluorocarbon is not going to leave much of a knot in terms of size. I mean, I don't think even if you have micro guides, especially on a spinning rod, you're going to be fine.
Mm-hmm.
I think micro guides when you're throwing 40-pound fluorocarbon and 20-pound or 40-pound braid, 20-pound fluorocarbon, you're flipping a jig. That's a different story.
Yeah,
and that's a whole different show, a whole different rabbit hole to go down.
You know what's really interesting, man? Totally different rabbit hole. Like you said, I've seen companies like moving away, like back away from micro guides. Like companies are realizing, or at least me up north, like I don't buy a rod that doesn't have standard guides.
Same.
I fish too early in the year. like I'm fishing cold weather conditions. I want as big of a guide on that thing as possible because I don't want it to ice up. So Alex Rudd is correct. I do like them thick girls, man. I like them big, thick girls.
If you don't, then you're
Smallmouth.
probably in the wrong show.
Yeah.
I think Alex spelled girls wrong, though. It should be GURLS.
There you go.
The multiple C's there.
Yeah.
A really good question here from 247 Bass. We already have some fire questions coming in, so really kudos to you guys. Do you need to be on a school of fish with a spy bait, or is it a lure you can cover water with? I think both, dude, because like on certain bodies of water, I've used it where I kind of just go down the bank and just cast at structure with it, where I might not be able to find or see fish on that backside, but that spy bait creeping over top of them can kind of lure them out. What do you guys think?
Yeah, man, like a spy bait is so versatile in the sense that I want to be in an area where I have confidence that their fish are living, right? Like it's not something I'm just going to pick up and try to like burn down a bank or cover water. But if I know there's fish on this general flat, or I know there's like isolated pieces of cover, whether it's a boulder or it's, maybe a slight ledge that comes off, I have total confidence picking that thing up and throwing it, which is where we'll start to get into the hair jig thing, right? Like when the conditions to me feel right, you get that kind of slicked off conditions, high sun, kind of negative, what I would typically consider negative bass mood conditions. That's when I'm going to pick up that spy bait. And I have no problem throwing it as long as I'm confident there should be fish in the area.
Would you qualify a spy bait as a search bait, or do you think it's more of kind of like a jerk bait where you know fish are in the area and you're just trying to elicit a different bite?
A spy bait to me is more like a swim bait in the sense like, I mean, I'm not talking like a paddle tail swim bait. I'm talking like a big swim bait. Like it is a big fish technique. It's like the drawing power on both a spy bait and a hair jig is like absolutely ridiculous in the sense these fish, it looks halfway normal in their environment, just like a big swim bait does. They don't see it a ton, and it actually draws bigger fish to these baits because it is so natural. Like there's secondary action, there's natural action in the spy bait. And to me, it's like a big swim bait. It's the same sort of concept.
Yeah. If anyone in the chat has never watched a smallmouth or largemouth eat a spy bait or hair jig in clear water, it is vicious and it is amazing because they come out of nowhere.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like one of those things you can fish over deep water as long as it's clear water, and they'll come out from the depths. I mean, it's kind of like a jerkbait in that aspect as well, as you don't need to, like in clear water and 20 foot of water, I've thrown a 110 and had them come up from the bottom to eat it. It's kind of like the same way with the spy bait. Go ahead, Andy. Sorry, I interrupted you.
I was say, when I first learned about the spy bait, I want to say it was probably 5 years ago when people didn't know anything about them. And there's a spawning flat in Buffalo that you can go down. And we probably caught 60 to 80 fish in like 4 or 5 hours on it. And it's like 6 to 10 foot deep, but gin clear, so you can see everything. And you'll see a little rock pile and you'll cast out by it, and all of a sudden you just see a black shadow. You're like, oh, I'm going to catch him. You just pause it and then start reeling ever so slowly and just disappears from like 70 feet away. It was the coolest bite ever. And
yeah, dude.
If nobody's ever fished it, they have to buy one and try until you get one. Because once you get one to bite, you're hooked. It's a ride.
Oh, yeah, when you bomb that thing, you can't find your bait, but you're like, oh, look, there's a smallmouth there. And then your rod's getting yanked out of your hand. You're like, oh, I found my bait. Here it is.
Well, so this is another thing I find really interesting. Like we talk about how insanely quick they come up and eat these baits, but at the same time, it's also like most times it's a push bite, right? Like they're not coming up and like hitting this thing and spinning away from it. Same with a hair jig. Like it's typically a steady retrieve. It's really slow, kind of methodical, and then they just kind of come up and overtake it and just kind of keep coming towards you. So here's the hot take, man. Like I actually think a lot of people spend way too much money on bass fishing rods for these techniques, spy bait and hair jig, and even a small swim bait, right? Like most of the time, all you need is to have the right action to actually load up onto that fish. So when you do realize that your line is not where it's supposed to be, you can lean, get a good hook set, and fight that fish back to the boat. And there's not really moderately expensive hair jig, spy bait, small swim bait rod that's on the market. And that's kind of what TFO and I are working on to come up with, because a lot of times you don't feel that bite. Like, yes, they hit it quick, but a lot of times they're like coming to you or they're pushing it. So you just need something that fights that fish well, that you're not spending $200 on, especially to fish it. Like what? How many times you throw a hair jig a year around the spawn for like 3 weeks, and then you throw a spy bait for maybe a month and a half, 2 months throughout the summer. But
that pretty much sums it up. Yeah. It's a small time frame, honestly. It's pretty specific summer, but because I haven't experimented with it much in the fall. I'm sure it could probably work. But at that point in time, I mean, if they're already destroying an A-rig, why would you throw anything else?
Exactly.
They're hitting a crankbait. They're hitting a football jig. I mean, I could think of a bunch of other different things. But it's a great point. But I also have to say, I got to kind of almost disagree, but also partially agree, because I'm kind of 50-50 where I've had them push it, and it's almost like a rapid fire, and then you're just kind of reeling to catch up. But I've also had it where, like, I've watched them come up and eat it, and they are spinning as soon as they eat it, and they have that almost head first in them, which is interesting.
I got you.
But I think for the most part, they are chasing it, but it's an interesting topic to kind of think about. But like, yeah, rod wise, I mean, you don't need anything crazy. I think it's no different than like a crank and stick. I mean, you don't need to spend over $150 for a rod that's going to get the job done and job done well. I mean, you're seeing more and more of these rods that are $100 to $150 that are feathers, and a lot of guys, they go expensive. Man, I was one of them where I spend more money because I wanted a rod that was light like a feather. And now you can get them at those low costs, and they're good rods too.
So my whole thing, kind of rabbit hole here on the expensive rod take, even though you can get a rod at $100 to $150 that might be as light as a feather, I feel like you lose out on some things like the crispness of the rod in most instances, or it will actually be light as a feather, or it'll be too wimpy, if that makes sense. Like the action is too soft. And for those techniques to cast them out there far enough, you need a really good quick action to that rod, fast, or even like an extra fast tip, but with that parabolic action in it, so you're not compromising it on the cast.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's where those expensive rods kind of do come into play. I am personally an expensive rod person. I like the sensitivity, the lightness. It's just, I have really bad elbows and wrists, so I need light, crisp rods that I'm comfortable fishing with all day. So that's my hot take.
My big thing on that too is, like, I agree. It's just a matter of, like, for this technique, if you get a rod that has that right crisp action, right? Like that's kind of where I was pushing for. That was like, I don't like to throw out company names. If you're going to throw like a really expensive rod for this technique that a lot of guys talk about, there's the improvements are
minuscule, is what you're trying to say. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, but you get it. Yeah, I agree with you. Because like my drop shot rod is so insanely specific, and like I know what the difference feels like between a soft, like when I go to move my bait and it's not moving, or it's like too mushy. I mean, so I get it.
Yeah. Interesting question from Keystone Fishing. He said, "Spybait or jerkbait? You can only have one for the rest of your life. Which are you choosing?"
I'm going jerkbait. I'm going jerkbait.
If I was going to try to be competitive and like tournament fish a lot for the rest of my life, I'd go jerkbait. But for fun fishing, I'm going spybait 100%.
I love power fishing with the jerkbait.
See, but I can fish a spybait all day long. A jerkbait, I can fish for an hour, and then I'm sore as hell for the next week.
This is a hard one for me, because where I live, and Ben, you understand Great Lakes, like that's sight visual fishing for giant smallmouth. And a jerkbait is fun, but I personally think I would have to go to spybait, just because there's some specific stuff, as you know, where they're only going to probably eat that spybait or a couple other little things, and watching them eat that is just incredible.
See, that's for me, like that's why I like the hair jig bite. Like that's why I like to throw the hair jig. The spy bait's cool, but I've just never gotten like on that bite. like when it's right. Whereas the hair jig, I've done it. Like I've seen it. I've watched it happen. Like I can look at this boulder and be like, okay, here we go. And make that cast and like watch them come out and track it and get all the way to the boat and spin around and then go back and make the same cast and catch them. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, Oklahoma's worst angler, my man. Thank you for the shout out. You're dreamy too, man. I'm jealous of the beard.
I think it's what's funny about quick sidebar. Apologies to the folks. But Alex, if you watch his live streams, he's always chewing on his beard and his mustache.
Yes. I could almost get there. Like mine is to the point where I'm probably going to start getting yelled at the bank because it's almost to that point.
Dude, see, like I always say to myself, I want to grow like a beard out, but once it gets like to the point where I got to trim it, just cut it off.
So that's the issue. You have to get past the point of trimming it because once you get past that point, it no longer is itchy.
It's just like I look at myself in the mirror and I'm like, oh, or like if it starts to overhang your lip. That's just.
Yeah, I do trim around the lip, but that's about it. And then because I'm a banker, so I have to be kind of a little clean. I'm a little fuzzy now, but I usually trim up my edges.
Oh, dude, yeah.
Andy, you're being requested for your email in the comment section.
I just sent my email a few minutes ago.
Oh, maybe I didn't see it. I'm still trying to catch up. You guys are killing it in the chat tonight. Let's see. Here's a good question. How deep is too deep to throw spy baits?
Okay, so this is where we really get into the different sizes of spy baits that are available because they have really fine-tuned it to the point where they have spy baits for almost every situation. From a G-Fix, they have like the G-Fix 60, which is like not a bass spy bait. Then they have an 80. They might even have a smaller one now, a 70 or something. But like the 80 standard is really like that 10-foot or less range sort of spy bait. Mm-hmm. Then they have the G-Fix, which is almost like the 80, but has a little bit better castability, sinks at like a fraction of a foot faster per second, but doesn't track like quite as straight. It tracks more nose down. So really there is I guess a long way to the answer is there really is no depth too deep. You just have to understand how that bait is going to react to the way you're turning the handle and if it's going to have lift on it. And yeah, you have to really play with it.
Yeah.
It's not a good answer.
There's so many variables. Andy, do you have the 90 with you? I only have 80s up here with me.
I have a 90 without hooks.
That's fine.
So here is a 90 in Ghost Minnow. So I do have an 82, so let me hold them up here together. Yeah, so.
It's a little bit taller, right?
It's actually, I believe maybe like a centimeter or two taller. It's a fraction, but the 80 is on top. Let's see if I can do it this way as I'm sticking them in my hands.
Those
the hooks are so good.
Those dual hooks are so sticky.
I feel like a huge variable though is water clarity. Like it could be dependent on how deep you could throw it. It's like kind of what we were mentioning.
Trying to make it work. So
yeah,
they're about
same.
The 90 is just, I think it's like an eighth of an inch longer. It's not much.
But
maybe
I think
this will work. There we go. So the tail's in the same exact spot, and it's just a hair bit longer for the 90 over the 80.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I don't know how deep. Glenn, do you know? Andy, do you know the weight for the 90? I only have 80s up here. I don't know.
80s is a 3/8 ounce. Or like.
I want to say it's a half. It's just slightly heavier. It could even be like a 7/16. I've never really messed around with it much. I mostly throw the 80s. So
yeah, if you can buy one, like if you're gonna buy and invest in one spy bait to get into it, I would say the 80 G-Fix because you can cast it, bait caster or spinning setup. It casts way better than the standard 80, just the way that it's weighted, even though it has almost the exact same action. And then the color that I would choose, they just released the shiner color. Like that's a regular color now.
Oh wow.
Yeah, which before they didn't have. It looks just like Emerald Shiner. That's my favorite color.
That's sick. Yeah, I think the biggest variable though is water clarity for that.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends. Like if you're trying to target fish that are on the bottom specifically, because like that needs a whole other deal. But like if you're trying to target fish to bring them up from off the bottom, I'd say. I mean, I'm not. If the water's crystal, I won't be afraid to throw that in 30, just because I know that that's an aggressive bait, kind of like how Ben touched on. It's like a big swim bait where it has a lot of drawing power. They're not going to be afraid to come up and obviously try to eat it. So, Snake River guy says, or asking, when do you even decide to pick up a spy bait? What time of year, water temp, cues? Biggest thing for me is crystal clear water, and that's the first thing. And then for me, it's a summer bait. I've never really experimented with it in the fall or early spring, just because they're hitting other stuff that I don't even need to pick it up. What do you guys think?
Same for me, pretty much. Like for me, it's more of a summer technique. After like basically when they're spawning, basically through like late summer is when I'm going to have a spy bait tied on.
Yeah, I was going to say mine is like 58 degree. I want to say it's right around that 60-degree temp when I've gotten the bite to go really good. So right before they start getting on the beds and they get grouped up really well, you can really pound on them with the spy bait because they're still eating bait. I know we have some minnows and baitfish that'll spawn right before the smallies do. So it's a really good time for it. And then all the way through fall, I'll throw it in spots.
So the same phenomenon that I had happened a couple of years ago, I was fishing this lake. These fish like weren't on beds when we started the day. As I moved through the day, like fish were starting to push up on these flats and starting to roam, and you could sort of see them because it's crystal clear water. But what was happening was it started overcast. Like the day started out really nasty, overcast. We're fishing isolated boulders. So I was picking up a hair jig. I was picking up actually a brown and white hair jig. This is what I like to fish when I'm fishing around mayfly hatch or I'm fishing around a lake that has a lot of crawfish. So I picked up a brown and white hair jig, and I was fishing this around in the overcast conditions while my buddy was fishing a spy bait, and I smashed him. Like it was like 5-1, 10-1, the number of bites. Well, then all of a sudden the sun started poking out. Still glass calm conditions, you could see forever. But as soon as that sun came out, that spy bait like just took over. I think it's the way that the light hits those props, and the light actually like makes that bait really kind of look like a natural bait fish through the water. That he smashed me like it wasn't even funny.
Kind of like almost like on a minute scale, but like a spinnerbait blade.
Yeah. You get sort of like that refraction and reflection off the blades and going through the body. And he was throwing a translucent body, so it wasn't like super obvious like a hair jig. But yeah, it was crazy.
I think that is kind of like a general rule of thumb, because we have a couple of questions. I know Warren Beard's asking, best conditions for a spy bait, and I think the only time I've never experimented with it over overcast, and I think it's a good example, Ben, you brought up of how it can be, how they both have their advantages for different conditions. But I think it's got to be sunny, and it's got to be clear water and slick calm, or else I'm probably not going to pick up that spy bait.
Yeah, I mean, my most successful days have been sunny. Like there has to be some sun for me to have the confidence to really throw it. Like I can't even say I've thrown it in overcast conditions.
I have caught them in overcast conditions, but they will only eat one color, and that's the plain white one. Like the bright pearl with the purple head. That's the only one they'll eat when the clouds are out.
So do you think it's more of like it just looks more natural, like it's not a super translucent bait, or what do you think?
I think it just stands out better because a lot of those spy baits are very translucent, so they need that sun to reflect off those blades. With that pearl one, with that shimmy, it still reflects enough in that dull, dreary condition that they can track it from a ways away.
It's sort of like how you choose a trap color, like when you're fishing a trap for smallmouth, right? Like go in with like a more translucent color or a chrome color in sunny conditions, and go into a more flat and opaque, like white color in overcast conditions.
Yep.
That's super interesting.
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, this is going to stick out way more than a translucent, hard-bodied spy bait. I mean, especially if those blades can't reflect off anything. that's obviously going to stand out. And I think it's kind of like similar to the argument over matte colored or translucent jerk baits in conditions, right? I think that's a very similar argument. But I'm trying to think. I mean, do you kind of talking about the hair jigs for a second here? I know we're kind of bouncing around them on each bait, but when it comes to conditions or hair jigs, obviously it can excel in overcast, but are you throwing that in clear conditions as well?
Mm-hmm. I throw them both. For me, a hair jig is a shallow water. Well, the shallow water way that I fish a hair jig is you look for isolated pieces of cover or kind of like a certain bottom composition changes where I'm going to be throwing it. And a lot of times it's a very visual thing. Like it's moderately shallow water. Like if I can't see bottom, whether bottom's in 12 or bottom's in 6, like I'm not going to typically throw it.
Right.
But yeah.
Andy, how much have you thrown hair jigs? I'm curious. 0?
Okay. When I'm casting for bass, 0, but I do have a bunch of marabou jigs for steelhead fishing. Okay. And fun little fact about a marabou jig is in the springtime, if you ever have smallmouth that run the tributaries, you can go down there with like a little tiny float with like a couple split shots and pop them for those stream lake smallies that come up and spawn, and they will obliterate them underneath the bobber. It is absolutely a blast.
That's insane.
Yeah, like you can do just absolutely incredible numbers. So there's a guy in the chat called Sean Firkins. We used to do it all the time in the spring. In the Cattaraugus, there's a stretch, like it got to a point I would tie a purple and black marabou and fish underneath the bobber. And I would cast it out in this one run, close my eyes, shake the bobber 3 times and just set the hook. And there would be a fish on. And they were all 3 to 5 pounders, just dumb. So I know the power of it. I haven't found the right rod to translate it into open water, and there's other things I'd rather do. So, but it is something I want to learn to do. So I'm actually looking forward to
stuff.
It. Exactly, yeah. But in the stream of current.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, that's a whole other episode, that floating fly. Good grief. But
I've never really done it, so I can't say anything.
I've watched somebody do it once and kicked my butt with it, and I was like, I can't do that. Like it's gonna take me a while to learn that.
The hair jig deal was like that for me. My buddy Durz beat my eyes in. We were fishing the spawn tournament. Neither of us were very good like sight fishermen, and we didn't go into it like having fish marked. And so like last 20 minutes of the day, we pull out to this rock jetty that we knew fish should have been staging on, and he just knocked my eyes out with a hair jig. I played netman, and we did pretty well in the tournament. So
yeah. Well, what I was going to get at with the question, I'm just picturing that rock jetty right now, and I'm actually really jealous. Like you have a brown, right? That brown tan color, and then you have a black. Mm-hmm. What do you choose in between? Because I have only confidence in the black. I've had times where I've been on certain bodies of water where they wouldn't touch the brown. They'd come check it out, but they'd only commit to the black.
99.99% of the time, it's going to be a black hair jig. Like almost all of the time, it's going to be black. With the only exception being if there's mayfly slicks, then I'm going to pick up the brown. Right? Like that's the only time in my brain where I'm going to say they're going to eat a brown hair jig because it looks maybe like a mayfly swimming through the upper part of the column. Besides that, like I don't know what this looks like. I really have no idea. But like
leech.
Yeah, a leech.
That's about all I can do.
Yeah. Other than that, it looks like crap.
Regardless of what it is, they absolutely smash it. And I say all these things, but like I tie olive and I tie them with chartreuse in them, and I get all excited because it's
Have you
the middle of winter.
Pure white?
Not.
So here's a little tidbit for you. Tie some pure white ones with a gold head with a little bit of gold flash shabu. On a cloudy day, you might be able to get them to eat that.
Did you say flash?
That would be sweet.
Flash shabu.
Yeah, flash shabu's hold on.
I've never heard that. That was a weird term for me. But I think there's something to touch on here that's kind of important is that these baits
busting out the box.
So someone in the comments was asking if I buy mine or if I tie my own. I tie my own. I started when I realized that I had nothing better to do throughout the winter. But Flashaboo, dude, like I have this gold flash. I have so many different colors of flash because I tie it in my jigs too. So like I tie it in my flipping jigs because it's sneaky up here. But Flashaboo is legit. Let's just put it that way. Like,
and you don't need a bunch, like a
couple strands, like a couple strands of flash.
Yep. You always, so when you tie it, I used to tie my own hair jigs a lot for steelhead and stream bass. So when you tie it, you put your thread on first, and then you glue your thread, right? So you get that sticky part, and then you'll put your Flashaboo on the bottom side, so the hook point will be down. You put that Flashaboo on the back, and then you wrap it a couple more times, dab a glue, and then you put your marabou on it, and then keep tying, and then you're good to go.
Yeah, and the same thing with like a I don't know how much I should share. With a swim jig, dude, with a swim jig, if you tie, I learned this when I was following one of the guys on tour last year. If you tie flash into your darker colored swim jigs, it actually really accentuates all the other colors in that swim jig, especially in dirty water situations. So like tannic water, I'll fish a darker color swim jig with a little bit of Flashaboo, and I swear, like, it just outfishes a standard, silicone jig, and living rubber is a totally different situation, but it's a totally different topic. It is amazing.
Yeah.
I can't believe you never heard of Flashaboo.
I'd never heard.
Like on my
so
mind,
that crystal. You know that crystal that's in the brown one that you held up?
That's Flashaboo.
Yeah. That's Flashaboo.
That right there.
Yeah. And it comes in all different sizes. Like I think you can get like 1 millimeter, 2 millimeter, and then they make it up to like 5 millimeter, which is like this brick thickness to it. But it looks so cool if you tie it in the right situation.
Right. Okay. Let's see. Real quick, because I know we talked about it, but I think we kind of skimmed over it briefly of kind of like a determination of what we're talking about. And Forrest, a friend of the show, asked about line preferences. I know we talked about it a little bit of the braid to fluoro. I'm personally a fan of it because I throw it shallow and deep. I think it depends, and feel free to disagree with me here, guys. I think if you're someone that likes to throw it out deeper, I think a braid to fluoro is the way to go. But if you're shallow, more impactful, more aggressive bites, I think straight mono is the way to go because it has more of a give to that vicious. I don't know. Maybe the rod's just the biggest determinant, but I feel like if you're predominantly throwing it shallow with how vicious those bites are, I think straight mono is the way to go. Because I've done both, and they both worked well.
You threw mono on a spy bait?
Yeah. So really quick story. Was at a Fed tournament. I was fishing, practicing with my buddy Liam and our buddy Tom on a separate boat. His boat broke down. So they left me on his boat to trolling motor to a marina so they could drive back the 10 miles to go grab his truck and all that. Beyond the point, basically, he's like, feel free to use my rods, whatever you want. And he had a Fantasista. He had a Premier Regista. How do you pronounce it, Ben?
Yeah, I don't know. I know which one you're talking about, but I don't know.
All right, but so he had straight mono on it. I think it was 8-pound mono, and I never tried it. I didn't really know if I'd like it. But I threw it, and like the second cast, I hooked up into it. It was actually kind of nice how it loaded up with straight mono.
Yeah, it's like a dirtier water technique where I've heard of guys doing it down south. I've never done it, but I'm a braid guy. I'm a braid guy in all my spinning techniques because I don't like picking out wind knots as much. So.
Yeah, and I don't want to retie or respool a reel with mono every other day because that'll probably. But I think it's really all personal preference, how you fish it, where you fish it. Let's see. I'm trying to catch up on these questions here. But
they're coming in like wildfire.
Yeah. One quick question I have for you, Ben, is how important do you think the style of head is? Because like I have two different brands here. Like I have the Fighter Fly, which is more of like that more pointed head. And then I think this is VMC's Marabou, where it's just a ball head. How important do you think that plays into a hair jig and how it's action, I guess?
I think the biggest thing is, so I actually tie mine on a Do It Molds. This is the Midwest Finesse head. I don't know if you guys can see that.
It's like a little mushroom head.
Yeah, it's just a mushroom head. It is an Ed head. I don't think the head necessarily matters, as long as it swims straight through the water, and it's a 90-degree line tie. Like a 90-degree line tie for me on a hair jig is really, really key. Same thing, like if I'm fishing a swim bait up in the water column, like I fished on a 90-degree tie, just because of the way that it keeps that bait leveled out and planed out horizontally. But I don't know that head style really plays that big of a key.
What about weight, like size of the head? Logan Sullivan.
I'm throwing a 3/32 almost exclusively if I'm swimming it. So if I'm swimming it, 3/32 is like my favorite size. I'll go up to an 1/8 if I'm fishing in like 10+ foot of water, but most of the time it's a 3/32.
Now, are you doing the old bit of plastic trick on there too?
Yeah, so I modded actually my Ned rig mold to accept. It normally takes like a really, really short bait keeper on there. And so I modded it, and if you guys can see this, I put a long bait keeper in there. It comes like almost 3/4 of the way down the hook. And so that's actually really key, because I was putting these chunks on of max scent, and I get it like up there and then fall down like 2 casts later. Up there, I fall down like 2 casts later. So having that longer, you guys can't really see it. Having that longer bait keeper helps keep that bait way up there. So that's another really big thing there.
So I don't want to glance over this. You mentioned you put max scent for the part. Well, talk about that for a second. Does that play at all, do you think?
I don't know, really, truly. But
that's an interesting.
So like when things get tough, I was never a big believer in scent. Just never really was. Like scent is whatever. But there was a time this last year, Alex and I were going bed fishing. And if anyone's ever bed fished for smallmouth, there's this big saying like smallmouth on a bed will eat absolutely anything, which 99% of the time is true.
Mm-hmm.
I spilled gas on my hands when I went out fishing. And I'm not kidding when I said I could not get a bite, dude. Like Alex and I would fish the same fish on a bed. I'd flip in. This fish would like get really negative and like swim way off the bed and like leave. We'd come back to that fish, and like 10 minutes later, Alex would flip in and he'd catch that fish like second or third cast. And then I started like really getting in my head, washed my hands, and I started catching these fish. And then I saw it like later in the year where max scent plays a big deal on pressured fish. Like on negative fish, it just gives them another reason to bite when maybe they would otherwise not. So
right,
you're just appealing to more senses.
Yeah,
and when a lot of guys are fishing around you, like in most situations, like if you're dropping on fish and there's no other pressure on the lake, you can get those fish to go on just about anything. But when those fish are pressured and you're fishing a lake like Lake St. Clair, or you're fishing a place that fish see a lot of baits and they consistently get pressure, that scent just gives them a little bit more incentive, like no pun intended, to bite that bait.
Yeah.
And not to mention, too, it actually helps you cast the bait a little further, too, because it makes it a little denser and heavier. So you're going to get that extra 5 to 10 feet out of it, possibly. Because you know that marabou gets caught up in the air as you're casting it, and it's like, like almost like an umbrella.
Exactly. And like that little piece of worm, I just use the back end of a hit worm or a flat worm, whatever I have laying in the bottom of the boat, and just push it up on there.
Yeah.
Now, do you ever leave like the full plastic on there for like a tail effect?
I played with it a little bit. I don't know that it actually helped me get more bites. Like I played with it on the brown one that day that I was catching them on a hair jig, but
like you're talking like a bigger hair jig, almost like a ledge type of hair jig.
No, I took a little piece of the flatworm and I like left enough where it would hang off the back and like sort of wiggle. I think
it a little bit.
Yeah, and I don't know if it helps or if it just kind of takes away from the hair jig, but a hair jig literally does nothing. Like it looks like the dumbest thing. It's like,
oh yeah,
which it does nothing, but it's doing a lot at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's something that's really important to point out because, like, at least for me, and I'm sure there's people that are simple-minded like I am, where when you first start throwing a hair jig, you see it in the water, and you're like, this thing's doing absolutely nothing. You have no confidence in it because it looks stupid and boring. But like I went and I put goggles on, I went underwater, and it's crazy how it actually like pendulums with that hair. But like I think it's important to know that there's a learning curve with a spy bait and a hair jig. And it's more of just and it's kind of cliche, but you just really just need to keep it in your hands for a while, because once you get those first couple of bites, you're gonna start dialing that in. It's not they're not crazy complex baits to learn. They're pretty simple in how you fish them. It's just more of learning a when and where and what kind of different variables you need to kind of maneuver around them, and like which one, because they're both similar, I think, in how you fish them. It's just I think the biggest thing, like we talked about, was conditions on which one you choose over the other.
Yeah, there is a natural action. The benefit of hair is that hair is part of something living, or at one point it was part of something living, right? So I think it has a natural look or action underwater, and the marabou actually breathes and moves as you swim this thing along. So you'll know if you tie a good one pretty quickly, because it doesn't track straight, or it wants to roll, or like it's too short, and then the hair does nothing. Like it literally will be at the back of the hook and just look like a little blob. But if you tie a good hair jig, it actually does have like a little, like almost a little movement to it. But you can tell pretty fast, because I've tied a lot of bad ones.
Right.
a lot of real bad. It took a lot of bad ones to get a couple good ones. So.
I mean, yeah, you're not going to get it perfect off the bat. I mean, it's kind of tough, but yeah, it's funny. You're like, yeah, the hair, it's like a living thing. Like Brendan Chapman puts, you haven't lived until you've cut Ben Milliken's camera guy's hair and caught smallies on hand-tied jig, which is funny because I don't know if anybody listens or watches Jay Seaman's channel. He literally has a video. He just walks up to his cat, cuts the cat's hair, ties a jig, and then catches, I think, like a laker or something through the ice. But that is pretty funny. So you could get creative with that. Let's see, how long of leader? We talked about that a little bit. The length,
really long, like 30 foot.
30 foot.
Yeah, I'm gonna play around with that, because I like I mentioned, I only went from like reel handle to the base of the reel, so I think that's what I'll play around with this year is that. And you do 30 foot for both hair jig and spy bait.
But what's really funny is I'm not like a long leader guy most of the time. I actually, for my drop shot, I tie to a swivel that doesn't even go inside my guides. So like it might be 4 foot off the top of my hook. So I'm not normally a long leader guy. It's all about like the functionality of being able to cast it.
So you say you use a swivel?
Mm-hmm. Some people do, yeah.
I use number 8 swivel. It's an 8 or 10 from VMC, or you can get them from Owner, but they're just tiny, tiny swivels. And I just reel it right up to the tip of the guide and flip it.
For spy baits and hair jigs?
Oh, no. For drop shot.
No, just for drop shot.
Oh, I was so confused for a second.
Sorry, no, I was just... I'm not typically a long leader guy, though. Like, I don't...
Right.
I don't know. I'm very functional.
I am the exact opposite with my drop shot. I like the same leader length.
That's because so cool.
So everybody has their own thing they're confident in.
Yeah. Really quick, thinking about that. So with your direct, so you're not to your bait for a hair jig or spy bait. Do you think there'd be any advantage of tying a loop knot so that it has like a free swinging action to it versus a more of a clinch?
Sure, I think so. I really am fast with Palomar and kind of lazy half the time. So like I know guys talk about a tight lining, like Tennessee. If you're going to tight line in like the right way, everyone talks about tying a loop knot. Well, you could probably do the exact same thing with this and get it to swim as straight as an arrow, but I just tie Palomar.
That's a topic I really want to dig into, but I have no idea who to approach about it. Because I think it's a very, very underrated technique that no one talks about.
Tight lining?
Yeah. Not many people do it, I feel like. At least I haven't heard of it.
I've only done it one time on, I can never remember the lake. I did it one time, and it was moderately successful, but bluff fishing, right? Like that's where I did it, was I was fishing bluffs on the Tennessee lake.
Yeah. That's the same place and scenario I did it on the one time I've done it.
Yeah.
Let's see what else we got in here. We got a bunch of people in the chat now. We got Rich Lindgren showing up. What's going on?
Yeah, we have a ton of people hopping.
Bass. Let's see. Going back to Spybaits, and I know we've had some questions in here about timing and such, and we kind of talked about how there's a couple of weeks to maybe a month and a half window where we throw these baits. But talking about color selection, how important do you think some of the minute details are with let's talk more Spybaits than anything else? And one thing I wanted to ask you specifically, because on the first podcast you've been on the show for, we had talked about, and you had actually helped me discover the idea of highlighting right under your trebles to give these smallmouth like a target point.
Yeah, I'm really big on. I'm really big on like having target spots on baits, especially jerk baits and baits that fish are coming up and getting. It's not really something I do that much with spy baits. I don't know that it's really, in my opinion, it's not a bait they're coming up and trying to just smash. Like they track that thing from a long way and they just kind of creep up on it and come up. And maybe they hit it hard at the last second, but a lot of times they're following that thing for a long time. Same with hair jig, same with like a little swim bait. But like having a bait, like a jerk bait, or I do it on crankbait sometimes, where they're coming up and reactively hitting that thing, target spots to me are really critical, whether it's a little chartreuse on the back end of the bait, whether you want to put a red treble hook on the front of your jerk bait or your crankbait. But having something that bass can key in on that's a little bit different, you'll notice a difference on how those fish eat the bait.
Right. So that being said, if you think that they're kind of tracking it for a while, then that color is pretty crucial.
I think having something very natural, like if you can try to spy baits particularly, like I am trying to match as close as I possibly can to what they're eating. Like I really want it to look like it's a natural piece of their environment because they're able to see it. A lot of times it's cleaner water technique where I'm fishing it. And so I just want them to get the best look at it and make the decision that it is a living thing and that they come up and eat it. So I'm choosing colors like your Shiner. There's an American, let me pull up some color lists because I can never remember the actual colors. CL Dace is a really good new color they came out with.
I'm so bad with colors of baits. I could tell you what they look like, but when it actually the names, Andy's really good with it.
For the most part, the spy bait game, I haven't really gotten into colors all too much, but I'm kind of like, these are the two I'll throw. Like this is the one I'm throwing most of the time when it's sunny out. You can kind of see it's got like a purple, pinkish hue to it. That's a good color. It's a Shiner color, but I don't remember the exact color. Ghost Minnow. Everybody knows Ghost Minnow. That's a really good, clear, sunny day one. And then this is the one I'll throw when it's cloudy.
Overcast.
Overcast.
It glows, right? That white.
Yeah, it glows. And then this one is very underrated.
Ooh. Is that a
cool color?
Yeah, it's got chartreuse belly and a blue back. And I actually really like this one when it's really sunny out, but you get a little bit of a ripple on the water. So you have like that 5 to 6 mile an hour wind breeze. So it's not really clear in the water because then you're getting a lot of light through. This one really will get chewed some days.
That's a sweet looking color.
That is sick.
I bought it on a whim, and there was 1 week a couple of years ago. This is the only one I could get them to eat for whatever reason.
Shadow Bassin is asking the deepest you would toss a hair jig, what weight? Any difference in line choice? I mean, the line we kind of talked about, we're pretty universal in the fact that we all kind of agree braid to fluorocarbon leader, that longer leader. For me personally, and I'm sure these guys might have different opinions. For me, I'm not tossing a hair jig any deeper than 10, 12 foot, but that's just personal. And I throw like an 1/8 or a 3/16, and then adding that small piece of plastic is huge for casting distance. But Ben, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, same. Like the way that we're fishing is swimming a hair jig, 10, 12 foot's about the maximum depth that I'm going to really fish that thing. And then I'm fishing a 3/32 or an 1/8. That's about it.
Pretty similar.
The line size doesn't change. It's always 10 or 8 to 6. Yeah.
Right.
Do you see a lot of casting difference between that 8 and 10 pound braid?
personally know, but it could be difference in brand. So I'm fishing. I tried the Berkeley X5, which I really, really like. But it is a different line than like your Power Pro 10 pound. So it could just be difference in line. So I can't say with certainty. I mean, I haven't really noticed it.
Have you tried the X9 yet? So it has more strands to it.
I've not tried it. I don't actually like that slick coating. So like the Power Pro slick, I'm not a fan.
Me either, honestly.
Call me crazy, but like I like the way that braid, I have almost like contact coming through the guides.
Yeah, it almost winds a little bit more when you set the hook or cast.
Yes. So like this is the Vermilion Red. It's their traditional Power Pro red 10 pound. And then I fish the X4 and the 8 or X5 and the 8 pound. But they're both phenomenal line. Like just fish something you can see. That's another really, really, really big tip. It doesn't matter if it's red or if it's their high vis or if it's their white. I like something that I can see to see if my line makes a movement it shouldn't be making in the middle of the cast or when I'm fishing something slow.
Now, have you ever tried nanofill?
Yes. I've not tried it outside of cold weather months. And I switched back to braid. I wasn't super excited about it.
So it's terrible in cold weather, as most braid is. But in the summertime, they stopped making it, from what I hear, and it's absolutely sad because with that Spybait and nanofill with like the 8 pound, you can cast way further than you can with normal braid.
So I noticed even in cold weather, like, dude, you could cast nanofill.
But it's super brittle in cold weather.
But it's
all braid
insanely
is, though.
brittle. Insanely brittle. Yeah.
But in the summertime, was
it the deal? I never tried it in the summer.
It can be. I used to only fish with nanofill on my drop shot rods. It was the only thing I would do because I like casting for them, and the power is really good because it doesn't stretch at all. But you could get away with like a 6 pound nanofill because it was super strong, just like braid, to like a 6 or an 8 pound leader, and you can cast further than braid like tenfold. But I heard they stopped making it, so I'm like,
I've not seen it anywhere lately.
Super.
Yeah, I have a couple buddies that only use nanofill for all braid on spinning reels because they can cast 20 to 30 times farther.
That's insane. I literally fished it one time, and then I took it back off and went back to braid.
Yeah, in the winter it's atrocious, but all braid technically, because if you don't have that slick coating on braid in the wintertime, it absorbs water. So as it gets cold, it freezes when you get below 32 degrees, and it actually causes the braid fibers to separate, and it can become very weak.
Oh, I didn't know that. So like, I just hate fishing when it's that cold because my line is just miserable. So I didn't know.
Yeah. So quick tip for you there: throw Vaseline on your guides or cooking spray the night before you go out, and go straight fluoro. Get away from braid in the winter.
Really?
Yeah.
That's really weird.
I was like ready to throw all my reels. Like I fish in cold weather, but I absolutely hate it. Like I was ready to just throw my reels in the lake this past year.
And I actually learned about the braid doing that from steelhead fishing because we use long noodle rods, and I would run braid on my spinning reel. Yeah. And I was breaking off like 10 feet above my float in the braid, and it was just like exploding. And I was like, it was 12 degrees outside. I'm like, the braid has to be exploding. So I actually had a spare spool, so I put the mono spool on and no more issues. So when I took it home, when I warmed up and I looked at it, the braid fibers actually separated. They expanded and separated and broke.
Oh, that's crazy. So instead of basically having 10 pound test line, you have individual strands of whatever that pound test. That's insane, dude.
So like if it gets like nicked on a rocket, like the fibers will start separating. That's where it would like expand and crack and break.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
We had this question up for a little bit. But now that Andy's done with his tangent, Gary is asking if you could see red very well.
Yeah, so where I fish is a lot of like the Great Lakes where the water tends to be a little bit more greenish blue. And so that flash color or like that really high vis yellow, I tend to lose a little bit more than I do the red. So like the red stands out typically against everything with the exception of shoreline. But with that green water, I like the red.
Right.
Have you ever tried white?
So that's I think why a lot of those guys were fishing that crystal last year, which is like that white X5. I haven't gotten my hands on any. I only have the moss green or whatever it's called, but I want to try it because I am not a huge fan of that flash. Like I can't see it well when I get on that green colored water.
Yeah, I like the white. I also like a neon green.
Yeah,
that's what I like a lot.
Yeah,
on all spinning for me. But is there anything else, Andy or Ben, that we might have missed or might not have covered or should cover with spy baits or hair jigs? Feel free if anyone's missing out too in the chat. Let us know for missing covering some Hellabass. Apparently I'm ignoring your comments. I don't see.
We got to give away coffee.
Oh yeah, dude.
So
you have a comment you wanna pick, Ben? That
I'll find one really quick. I have one more comment that I want to make about both of these.
Okay.
And it has to do with hook set. So when I'm setting the hook on either hair jig or a spy bait, it's never like a hard hook set. Like I'm never like leaning into these fish. It's always like a crankbait hook set where I reel down until I feel pressure and just lean into that fish. The hair jigs that I tie, super light wire, Gamakatsu 111 hook. It's a light wire hook, penetrates really easily. Same thing with the spy bait. What you're going to notice is if you actually set the hook hard on a spy bait, you're going to notice that fish comes in with one hook. It's typically the back hook, because what actually happens is you're pulling those other hooks away from him. And you're not, like, when you reel into that fish, they'll get more hooks, and then you're basically just pulling those hooks into their mouth and like letting it dig into their flesh. Sounds terrible, but like really I've noticed you get a lot better hookup ratio when you do that.
Well, I think the longer rod helps with that too, because a lot of times with those baits, it's a visual reference. You're seeing them eat it for the most part. Yeah. But with that longer hook, like the longer rod, it almost delays it in a sense when you're doing that sweep. Yeah. So you just lean and keep reeling faster. It's like a drop shot set. You never really want to hammer them with the drop shot, like flipping a jig. You almost want to reel while leaning into them, and you pin them perfectly every time.
Yes.
But yeah, I noticed that when I first started spy baiting, I threw it on like a 6'10" rod, like a medium light, almost light action, because it had that beautiful parabolic bend to it. But when I would set the hook into them, I would pull it out of their face. And then when I went to a 7.2, actually my land ratio went way up because I was hooking them better with both trebles in the face.
I remember I was about to swear off spy baits when I originally got started because I would lose so many because you'd feel them eat it and you'd set the hook like a swim bait, right? And then you'd come back and they'd make one jump and that bait would have one hook and gone.
Yeah. And those hooks are only about that big.
They're tiny. They're number 8s or number 10s depending on the size you fish. Tiny hooks. So yeah, just lean.
Yeah. I just think it's such an easy hook set because you really don't have to do much of anything.
Just
as long as you got your rod tip up and you just keep reeling. It's really that's all it is to it. And that could be kind of difficult for a lot of people, kind of like how you mentioned setting the hook. It's so natural. I mean, I feel like the same thing for hair jig. I don't set the hook on a hair jig. I don't know about you guys.
Me either. It's just a lean. It's just pull and just lean.
Right. Let's see. Any other topics that we can cover? I know, Ben, you wanted to talk about one more thing, which I have to go grab so we can actually show it.
Yeah. So if you go grab that, I'm looking for a question, but we can use a little bit of this time to kind of talk about spy baiting some more. So, Andrew, you told a story where you caught a ton of fish.
I'll be right back.
Talk about the conditions that that spy bait played for you that day. Because I'm really curious. Like you said, it was around the spawn.
It was pre-spawn. It was right around like the middle of May, and they wouldn't eat a dang thing. But it was bright blue, sunny skies, clear water, slick calm, 0 wind. Water temp was right around 60. It was 85 degrees out.
That's insane.
And you had to cast as far as you could. And the guy was on, I want to say he had like the first version of Humminbird 360, and we were standing up on his bow together, and we could actually see like the individual rock piles with a little bit of fish around, so we could cast to them. And you would just cast it out, count down to like 2 or 3 and 8 foot of water, and just literally drag it like 4 foot down, so halfway. And I'd say call it 50 feet from the boat, you would just see this big black blob appear, and it would just be like, okay, I lost contact with my bait. So you start reeling a little faster, and your rod tip would load up, and you just lean into them. We're like, it's a 6-pounder. Like, this is ridiculous.
That's so
I'll never
insane,
forget
dude.
that day. Yeah, it was
So
just,
like, were you just target casting to dark spots?
dark spots and rock piles on 360.
That's crazy, man.
Yeah, like you would see a rock pile like 75 degrees behind the boat, and we would turn and cast to it and catch a fish just floating down this area.
Dude, electronics have changed. Like that's a great example of how electronics are changing what we're able to do with these baits too.
Yeah.
Because like a lot of times I'm the same way with live scope. Like I'll see a rock pile way before I'll ever be able to see it with my eyes, and you have to make that cast way, way, way away from it.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden you can watch your bait almost come down, and even if you don't see your bait on it because it's so far out, you'll actually see the fish come up out of the rock. You're like, oh, there's my bait.
Yes, exactly.
It's so cool. Yeah. I can't wait to get live scope on my boat. I have to get an Ultrex or a Ghost, because right now I'm rocking a Fortrex, but I'm probably going to be getting a Ghost here shortly, and then the Lowrance version of live scope.
That's so cool, man.
Yeah.
And
it's cool because I was going to say I have the 12-inch live on the bow of my boat, so I can actually run live scope, down imaging, and 2D or mapping all at the same time right in that live.
Dude, see, like forward sonar is insane. Like it's changing. It's changing so much for smallmouth guys, but also like watching guys like Fish the Moment, Johnny Schultz, the way that they're using it and understanding like general.
Patrick Walters,
ridiculous, man. Like the way these guys, so many people will hate on live scope and forward sonar, but the way that they are changing like the entire industry and the entire sport, because they're understanding fish behavior to a new level we never could before.
So one of my favorite pictures I just saw recently of Patrick Walters was when he was fishing Rodman at the St. John's. He was hooked up to a big one, right? And he's not even paying attention to the fish he's fighting. He was on his power pulling down while looking at live scope, because I'm sure he saw like 2 or 3 more big ones out in front of him. Like
It's
rod
insane.
off to the side, reeling, looking down with his foot on the power pole paddle, putting his power pole down. He was already dreaming of that next cast because he saw the big ones on there while fighting like a 6-pounder or something stupid.
It's insane, dude. Like I swear.
It's mad cool because you're tapping into groups of fish that
were inaccessible.
That no one has fished before. It's so sick, and the people that hate on it have never used it or seen how cool it is to watch 20 smallmouth chase your bait. And
I can't even necessarily get mad at people that are like way against forward sonar, because I remember the same arguments being had when side view came out.
Yeah.
Right, like when side view came out, people were talking about how inaccessible it was. Like it was too expensive. It was changing the sport for the worse. But you're sort of seeing another revolution in electronics that's only going to last. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be very long until it's more accessible.
Right.
Or fortunately, I guess.
Yeah, hopefully cheaper.
I'm super intrigued to see what Humminbirds looks like with a 360.
Yes.
Like a 360 live. That's going to be wild. Especially if they can get it like crystal clear, like some of the new live scopes are coming, like Lowrance's. Could you imagine like spot locked on a spot with 360 and it looks like an aquarium on your graph, just fish swimming around? I would sit there and watch it all. I don't even know if I could fish. I'm like, that's so cool. Like, look at that sturgeon
walking around your boat trying to follow a fish as it circles you.
Just insane.
Yeah, that is pretty nutty. Did you guys pick the winners?
I picked a comment that I really like because I think it was the reason I chose this comment. I think it was diving a little bit beyond just what bait we're throwing and the gear that we're using, and it's Jacob Meeker. He has what type of structure you look for when you're fishing these baits. So I really like that. Jacob Meeker, they're giving away some coffee for you, dude.
Yeah.
I think that's the second time he's won something.
I was going to say, his name sounds really familiar.
Yeah. I think he won an Angler Bullseye a couple weeks ago.
Oh, that's crazy.
Dude's balling out for him.
Oh, man, that's awesome. So I guess the moral of the story here is ask questions and you get rewarded.
Yes.
It's incredible.
Yeah, reach out to us, dude, and we'll get that sent your way. I mean, it sounds like we're already in connection, so obviously get us your contact info if you don't have it already, and we'll get that shipped out to you. Andy, do you have the actually it's a Facebook share. We'll actually do that towards the end of the show here. Once we're done with Ben, we'll announce the next giveaway winner when we look at the Facebook share. So if you're on Facebook right now, share this to your feed if you haven't already, and we'll pick another winner to win some Outdoorsman coffee. Let's see. Yeah, Ben, I have these up here. I have a couple things actually that I wanted to bring up and discuss.
Okay, so basically, before we got on live, I was talking with Bailey and Andrew because I started up a brand new channel called the Bait Making Channel, which essentially is dedicated towards like my passion of making baits, right? Like we have all winter long and we have this miserable cold weather. And so I spend a lot of my winter making jigs and pouring jigs and trying to pour plastics before it gets too cold. But I posted a video yesterday where I was making an affordable, ultra premium direct to head chatterbait or a vibrating bladed jig. And I don't have any with me, but essentially what I was doing is I'm using Do It Mold, Sparky Head mold, use aftermarket, basically chatterbait blades, and then super premium hooks. But there was a comment that came through on my video that was talking about the Queen's Tackle switchblade. And the reason I brought it up is because I saw that you guys are sponsored or work with Queen's Tackle. And I think it's it's an awesome product that you can use to make your own vibrating jig, even if you don't have access to maybe all of the components or the lead pouring stuff to make your own vibrating jigs.
Yeah, I was actually wanted to ask you if you use switchblades to make those because I didn't watch the full video yet. I actually have it stockpiled. But yeah, Queen Tackle makes what's called a switchblade. And what's cool is they make it in multiple sizes and colors. So they have a silver, and this is actually the large size. Let me get this up here so you guys can actually see it. And they have that direct tie. You see they're doing a horrible job at showing this. So you can actually see it has that swivel, so you can actually get that direct tie. So that's a large size, and they actually have a smaller size as well as gold that you can kind of be able to get customized with. It's really not
flip it the other way, Bailey, so the swivel lays down, so you can see the direct tie.
Let's see.
Yeah, and so the big thing with that is the reason, in my opinion, one of the reasons that a vibrating jig from Z-Man is so good is because the blade physically connects to the standard line tie, and it can actually chatter against the head, right? You actually get the kicking against the head, which causes the head to have movement and sound, as opposed to like a split ring. And
it's
that Queen's Tackle has a really cool piece of technology if you want to kind of dive into that.
Yeah, so basically all you do, let me see if I can get it to focus again in here. If you see, there's the bar laying across, but there's two bars that are keeping that one bar in place. And basically all you have to do is take your pliers. I'm actually posting a video. I think it's going to go out this Thursday. I'm talking with Jeff we're going to try to make it see if we can get Jeff in on some segments. Jeff is the owner of Queen Tackle. Let's see if we can get him on some segments of the video to add to it for more information, because obviously he's the master of it. I'm only just diving into it this past year, but basically all you do is those two bars that are keeping that smaller horizontal bar in place. You can use your pliers. See if I can get a good view of there. You can use your pliers to bend those back, and that bar comes out. And all you do is insert the eye of your jig head. It's got to be a vertical eye. You can't use any jig heads that have a horizontal eye. Let's see if I can. And that's basically the end product there. Is it has that you just insert your eye, and that gives it so much more free range of motion, and the thump is ridiculous, especially because it has that more room to give side to side, and it hunts a ridiculous amount, and that's what you want in your chatterbait. And it's a really fun thing to kind of dive into. I would have noticed though, like if you have, like I've tried putting it on a while back. I put it on one of the dirty jigs, swim jigs, and the eye is a little bit bigger on a dirty jig. The thump isn't as good. You have to play around with kind of the combination. It takes a little bit more work to kind of get to perfect it. You kind of have to perfect that trailer. Like if you have a crawl trailer that has a lot more propulsion, it's not as effective or as hard of a thump. But if you have like what is it? The Big Bites Kamikaze swim on.
Yep.
Was it Kamikaze
Yep.
Kamikaze swim on? That's all you feel is an insane amount of thump. It hunts ridiculous if you have that simple fluke style like trailer. You can do a bunch of different modifications with it. Like a little sleeper here for you guys too. I'm not afraid to show it on here. Slapped one on a swing head, and that action is unreal. It's bonkers, the action on a swing head. But you can, that's cool about it is if you have a jig with a vertical line tie, which I mean I might even try to take one of those smaller blades and put it on a hair jig and see what happens. You can just get so creative with it, and I think that's what's cool, and that's what's sweet about your channel, dude, is that you're going to be able to expose some of these things and give people some ideas.
Yeah, and that's really all it is like talk about the modifications I make. Like I'm a real nerd when it comes to bass fishing. Like that's all I think about. When I say other than family, like all I think about is bass fishing. So like coming up with different hook models to use and why I choose certain hook diameters, which sounds so nerdy. It may never grow that big. I mean, hopefully it does, but it's just my way or my outlet of sharing the stuff that goes in my brain to make the stuff that I make.
Right. And I'm totally realizing right now, I have this on upside down. I have it facing the other way. So that's one thing to be cognizant of is there's actually a fan back to how you're supposed to tie these on. So like the hook's facing this way and the line tie is facing towards the hook. So make sure you're
What are you doing?
I'm a bum.
Jump. He's going to tie it out and cast it out, and the blade's going to come back backwards.
Yeah, exactly.
The football head's going to be over the blade. It's just going to make like this weird clap sound. Might work.
Then he'll get bit, and then it'll
yeah.
make a new thing.
But the hook is down, so he's going to miss every bite.
Yeah.
A really good question here from Bo Judd, asking how well will that connection hold up when used with braid. I don't ever throw chatterbaits on braid for the pure fact of I don't like to risk the chance of like you got a big fish at the boat and it bends out the hook with that braid. That's just kind of personal preference. I doubt that it'll happen all the time, but I like to throw like a 15 to 20 pound fluorocarbon. But I know KJ Queen, the son of Jeff, has thrown it on braid like down in Florida and stuff, and he never had an issue. He's landed some freak giants. And it's go listen to Let's Talk Fish with Matt Airy. They had on KJ and Jeff the other day, and they dove into like, I would love to reiterate it, but it would just take forever to reiterate because they dove into how creative you can get with those switchblades and where you can implement them in your game without, beyond just putting a swim jig or a jig head on. But yeah, super, super custom, super creative. What kind of modifications do you see yourself trying to get creative with chatterbaits that maybe not others have?
Honestly, like I don't fish a vibrating jig hardly at all. Like very limited amounts. I shouldn't say hardly at all. I do a lot for largemouth. Don't really do it for smallmouth. So like in the last couple of years, I haven't really fished one. I don't know that I have any major modifications, but just being able to make my own makes me not as afraid to put like ultra premium components because it cost me like $3.50 to make a ultra premium bladed jig as opposed to a $16 jackhammer.
Mm-hmm.
So like legit, one of my biggest gripes is that like the best secret vibrating jig is the Tackle Warehouse chatterbait, right? Like that is such a good vibrating jig for $6.99 or whatever it is. But like I just prefer, if I'm gonna lose a bunch to pike in the springtime, I'm gonna be losing $3.50 with some good hooks on them.
Right.
Fair enough.
You take a pack of switchblades. I pulled up Queen's site real quick.
They're about $3.99.
They're actually $5.99 for a 3-pack, and you take a swim jig, which they make swim jigs that are tungsten, for $5.99, and you have yourself a cheaper and better chatterbait for $12, and you can have multiple because it comes in 3-pack. So not that we're just selflessly plugging Queen right here, but it's these are
20% off.
I mean,
20% off.
If we really want to self-plug here, there's a code at the bottom if you guys want to get 20% off if you want to get yourself some. But for real, like the modifications though that do get bites, it's something different that these fish have never seen before. And that's the point of why we're actually putting a video out about the Switchblade, is because it's something the fish don't see. I mean, no one else is doing, to my knowledge, and Ben, you can, or Andy, I know you guys are way bigger, bait heads than I am. So you would have way better knowledge than I. I don't know of anybody else that's selling just individual blades.
No,
there's like Phoenix sells the blades. Phoenix actually made the original vibrating jig that Brett Height used to make a bunch of money on. Then they had to switch their design because of Xena and own license to it. But they sell the blades that they use.
Echoing a little bit.
You're echoing now?
Ben's headset is going haywire on us.
No, I think we're good now.
It could be because I took the AirPods out. They're starting to hurt my ear. So my apologies. That was probably what the echo was for a second.
No, we're all set. Thank you.
But there's like different ideas floating around too about what you can throw that on to kind of trigger different bites. And I was sworn to secrecy on those, so unfortunately I can't spill those yet. I'm going to allow the person to spill the beans on that once they decide they're ready. It's just not my thing to give out. I hope people can respect that. But I'm trying to think. This is my question I was about to ask you, Ben. On the topic of chatterbaits, and this is something Andy and I go on and on about still. Are you a glass guy or a graphite guy?
Glass guy.
Glass.
I'm really like. I love a composite rod, and so the biggest thing for me is I throw it on a lot lighter line than I think a lot of people throw it on. I throw it on like 12 to 15 pound tests, and the biggest thing for me is you can tell how much faster it starts up on lighter line. Like if you go out and throw it on, just go try it. Throw it on 20 pound tests like you would normally throw, or a lot of guys say they throw a bladed jig on, and then go throw it on 12, 14 pound test line. The blade starts up so much faster just because of the line diameter connecting to the blade. It's
deeper
night and day. Yeah, it runs deeper, and so that lighter rod, it's not like a light rod. It's a brand new rod from TFO, 7.4 glass composite rod. It loads up better, and it helps me, like, instead of it being like a vicious like rip out of the grass, it's sort of like sponges it through and causes that thing to almost slingshot out, and I think you get more bites that way.
How many times have you gone to like on that sponge effect when you go to rip it out of the grass and the rod loads up and all of a sudden it releases and all of a sudden it's just like, oh, there he is.
Yeah, exactly, dude. So instead of like, you'll go to rip it and it like doesn't fully rip, it like pulls that grass, and then when it releases that bait, so like it almost, yeah, exactly, dude. So like it almost pulls that grass, and like right before it would rip that grass out from the root, and then it like lets go.
Yeah.
And then as soon as it lets go, that's when I get a lot of my bites. Versus when I'm fishing on like a 7.3 heavy or a 7.3, even a medium heavy standard, I just rip, and you come back either with grass on your hook or it just snaps out super hard. Like I think that delay actually lets that fish kind of see it scoot forward, and then it just comes like it's almost a double action, a secondary action.
Yeah,
so I'm a big glass guy.
I'm a huge believer. My favorite chatterbait rod I've ever thrown the chatterbait on was the KVD Power Launcher 7'4" medium heavy, the composite, because it's that same thing. Like when they would get in that grass, you could pop it, but you get that delayed pop, and that's every time is when you get your bite. But you can also burn it, and you don't even really hit to set the hook with it because of that glass. It's more of that sweep set and reel as fast as you can and walk back with them. They don't come off. I feel like your hookup to land ratio is way better with that composite glass than with just straight graphite.
Well, and again, man, a lot of those fish are eating that bait and they're getting it so good in their mouth. Like I found if I use a straight graphite rod or straight carbon fiber rod, you're actually pulling that hook out of parts of their mouth, right? Like a lot of times they'll mouth almost the entire bait and you're not driving the hook home. You're just literally ripping it.
Mm-hmm.
So I've found so much more success on that composite.
Are you setting the hook, or is it more of a reel down and sweep?
No, I set the hook. Like I pull it. Yeah. And what's really weird about a vibrating jig chatterbait, like you said, man, you can fish that thing fast, and like when they hit it and they just stop it, and you don't have time to set the hook, they just tend to get it so good. Like that rod absorbs it so much, like it doesn't like shock that bait.
Especially with like a jackhammer, because it has that ultra premium hook on it that just sticks them.
Yeah, you don't even have to like set the hook, but I set the hook. Like if I'm using a single hook, anything, man, I'm just gonna like.
Oh, you rip their face off, but with that glass rod, it absorbs it so well that it pins them just so deep. I've had a couple chatterbait fish where I've actually struggled to get the hook out of them because it sticks them so good with like a glass composite rod.
Yeah.
And it's always like on the inside upper part of the cheek, right in all that meat, where it just doesn't come off.
I'm a big fan of like a moderate rod. So like I was always a big fan of like, for years it was like my age group, everyone preached like a fast rod or an extra fast rod. Like you want this super highly reactive rod. Well, now I'm starting to see like with these super lines, your braids and your fluorocarbons that have no stretch and no give, super sensitive, like go into more moderate rods that still have like the quickness and crispness that you would expect.
Parabolic bend to them.
Exactly, dude. Like I'm fishing, my drop shot rod is a 713. So they call it a 7-1 medium light. It's basically like a 7-1 medium moderate fast rod. So it's crisp enough where like you still get all the sensitivity. Like a lot of people mistake a slow action with no sensitivity, which doesn't necessarily have to go hand in hand, right? Like you still get a little bit of the crispness that you would expect from a fast, but it loads up so deep into that rod. Like I can fight those fish on a drop shot so well.
That's a really good point. I think that's one thing that I feel like a good amount of people kind of overlook is how imperative rod actions can be. And I say that I'm at fault for that as well. And that's something that Andy has actually helped me with. I mean, I can put things to use, but like when it comes to the minute details and really trying to think, like dumb things down, that's probably one of my biggest weaknesses is like more because like if I have things go wrong, I more of think to what am I doing wrong mechanically versus what is my equipment doing wrong.
Well, and the other big thing here, man, is like everything is so tailored to the way that each of us fish. Like what works for me may not work for you, may not work for Andrew. And my buddy Nathan, him and I are best friends. We fish fairly similar, but his rod action and his rod length and power is so much different than mine because of the way that he sets a hook and the way that he fishes. And so like I've gotten the opportunity to fish a bunch of different rods over the years to really figure out, okay, this is what I'm looking for in a drop shot rod. This is what I'm looking for in a bladed jig rod. And so I've kind of gotten to dial that in a little bit and kind of tailor what I want. And then working with TFO to really say, okay, what do we have that fits this specific like action power and length, right? So just really cool opportunities. And I've been very lucky to dial in, but for everyone listening, like don't take our word for like gold.
Find your own comfort. Find your own comfort zone.
Yeah,
exactly.
We can disagree all that we want, but fish what you have confidence in.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and like don't be afraid to try different things out. Like I used the graphite for chatterbaits, and I could probably count on one hand how many fish I lost, but with how much I've heard many people, and as well as Andrew, tell me how good a glass rod is. I went and bought it was the Daiwa Type H. What is it? DX Type H?
Yeah, it's designed right after the Evergreen Hercules Leopold. So it's literally the exact same rod, but it was Daiwa's cost-effective way. Because a lot of people don't realize that Daiwa and Evergreen actually work hand in hand with a lot of the rod design. So Daiwa ships the Evergreen series of rods around the USA. So like
that's crazy. I had no idea.
Yeah, so the Combat series, Daiwa actually ships those rods. So that's where that DX Type H glass rod came about, is designed specifically after the Hercules Leopold rod, because that rod in Japan is $900 USA. So like you're not going to go out and spend $900 on a chatterbait rod.
No, I got it on sale on Tackle Warehouse for $80. It was fun.
And if you don't like it, I'm going to buy it from you. So
I mean, I've been just like any other northerner in the winter, flipping around my basement aimlessly with nothing to do, and it feels really nice. I'm just really excited this week to obviously throw it down in Tennessee.
The other thing, dude, is I've experienced the versatility of a glass rod and a composite rod in throwing like the L bills that are brand new to the market, or some of them are a little bit older, or like lipless crankbaits, right? For me, I can't throw lipless on anything other than a composite rod now. It is just night and day difference. It's the same concept as your vibrating jig chatterbaits, like the way that thing comes through grass and the way it rips. And it may be different on Gunnersville. I got my eyes beat.
Square bills too.
Square bills the same thing.
Like a 2.0 or 2.5 square bill, a glass rod, the way it absorbs when they eat that thing is incredible.
Yeah.
Or a composite rod. So Bailey, you're going to see like this whole new realm of stuff open for you by using that. You're going to be like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. If
you
don't want to take my word for it, take Ben's.
Right.
Real quick, my word's not necessarily great though, by the way.
How is that working by the way with TFO? Like you're designing a good amount of their lineup, correct?
So I got the opportunity to help with the drop shot rod, the 713 that's coming out this year. We're coming out with, like I mentioned, a hair jig, spybait, swim bait, finesse sort of rod. And then I got the opportunity to play with those composite rods last year before they came out. It was one of those things where I wanted to tell everyone because it's just so ridiculously good.
What is the price point on those composite rods?
$159.
It's not bad.
$149 or $159. So it's really not bad. Super, super good components. So,
right.
Yeah.
There is a electronics debate going on in the chat right now. Not really debate, but more of a conversation. But we did have actually a question just come in from Bo Judd. Said, Ben, so you're saying that if the fish eat the blade and all, the slower rod will not blow the bass mouth open on the hook set, increasing hook? Yes.
Correct.
Right.
Moderate action is what?
It basically, like, it's a rubber band effect. The best way that I've ever heard a moderate rod explanation explained to me was like, if you were to take a rubber band and you held that rubber band, right, and you hooked it to a paper clip, okay, that paper clip would never pierce your finger, but if you move your finger and you pull it with that rubber band, it's going to stretch and expand. It's going to basically allow that paper clip to stay hooked to your finger, because that rubber band or that rod, which has a slower, more moderate movement, will help those fish stay pinned, versus a glass rod, which is just super reactive a lot of times, tends to give that paper clip or give that hook the ability to come free. Or when you set the hook, pull it away from them. Slingshot engage.
I've found it so funny.
I love Zach, dude.
That's a little Talladega Nights reference.
Oh, dude. I'm so bad with movie quotes until someone was like, hey, and then
I think Andy and I's favorite is just what to do with my hands.
Slingshot engaged.
But really quick here before we start wrapping up. If you guys, because people are talking about electronics and such in the chat, if you had to choose between Panoptix or 360, which one would you go with?
Oh, it's so situational based for me.
Panoptix or Live Scope?
Panoptix.
I would go. It really depends on how you fish. If you're a guy that likes to fish deeper than 10 foot of water, I would go Live Scope or Panoptix. I mean, But if you can get live scope or 360, go live scope with the perspective mode. It basically has a like sort of modern, sort of 360
peripheral van,
yeah. So
interesting. I think I'd go 360 personally.
360 is super unique, but
because I mean, I was out with my buddy Casey who has 360, and we were talking about this for a while, and he was looking at it where he goes, I'd rather spend more time trying to figure out where they live than just going around looking for the fish. If you find out where they live, chances are there are going to be more. But if you're just looking for fish, chances are they might not be in that exact spot where you last found them. But if with 360 you find out where they live, then you always have that area. If that makes any sense. I probably explained it horribly, but it made sense.
No, I mean, I get it. I actually fish more areas where I don't see fish with live scope than I do. Like I'm fishing very specific spots. Like I'm using it to make directed casts as opposed to like fishing fish. I think that's the biggest misconception about live scope is you see all these videos where guys, and like even with the new active target or whatever, where guys are like targeting fish, but using it to actually understand what the bottom looks like. Has been really
like if you pan and all of a sudden you're like, oh, there's a boulder. You can cast right to that boulder without seeing the fish there.
And I say this without having used 360, so this isn't like necessarily like a great comparison, but like I know like I can look for a ledge, or I can look for where a drop like a boulder comes and falls off the edge, and so
yeah. I know that's pretty similar to how a lot of guys use 360 is. Those have the boulder or maybe, a ledge off to your right. They can see on 360. You take your rod, you line it up on there, and then cast. That's kind of similar to how I do it. And I'm sure, pinpoint from like a boulder standpoint, from like an isolated cover, Panoptics is probably better because you can pretty much almost, on a dime. Whereas 360, you're kind of making that guess coordinate with your rod and where it lays on the graph.
I'm super interested by the future of electronics, man.
Oh yeah,
I don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah, 100%. Is there any more topics that we want to cover tonight before we sign off here? I got one last question for you, Ben. Other than that, do we have something else that we want to cover?
Only if someone else has a question for me.
True. Yeah. If you guys have any more questions, throw them in the chat. We have to announce our last winner here, but real quick for you, Ben, my question for you is there, let me rephrase that. Who in your mind, who is one of the best smallmouth anglers that no one's heard of or that doesn't have the recognition? Like maybe they're not on social media.
Other than me? No, I'm joking.
Saw that coming out just
no. Honestly, that's tough. My circle is so social media driven and like so small. Like,
I mean, they could be on social media, but maybe somebody.
No, but like Kobe's phenomenal smallmouth angler. Kobe Pellerito. He's very well known by a lot of people that are small. I don't know, man. Like my circle is like this big. That's one thing that I want to like really improve upon is like starting to network and be better at networking. I'm really terrible at it. And my brain is like, how do I catch more smallmouth bass as opposed to like looking at anything outside of me? So I don't know. I really don't.
It's interesting to think about.
But like there's no one smallmouth fishes around here. You have Tom and Kobe who are like buddies, and then you have myself. And then you have the St. Clair crew. But like where I'm at, there's not really that many guys.
Andy, who around here, do you have an answer for that? I mean, I'm sure we could go on for a long time of how many underrated anglers there are that no one really knows about, but there are some damn good sticks out there.
My most underrated smallmouth fisherman in my opinion, and he taught me just about everything I know. Him and his dad. His dad has Allison. He was actually in this group chat. Is Sean Firkins. He's also another guide. That kid. He bought a boat this year. He shows up, fishes a tournament on Lake Erie for the first time in like 4 years, I want to say, and he damn near almost won the dang thing. He's literally one of the most incredible fishermen I know, and he has taught me just about everything I know personally. He and his dad used to compete like in the Redmonds. The guy I bought my house from, they fished like I want to say it was a pro circuit in Canada, or like a semi-pro circuit in Canada, and did really well up there, him and his dad. Well, his dad and the guy I bought my house from, but he literally, Sean, is incredible finesse fisherman for smallmouth. Just insane.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's so cool, man.
Yeah. Allison. So funny story. First time I ever went in that Allison on the Upper Niagara, there's like 4 to 6 mile an hour current everywhere. And his dad's pulling rods out of the rod locker as all these boats are taking off. It's a 3-hour tournament. I go, we should probably go. We're going to get beat. He goes, we'll catch him. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I have no idea how fast this boat is. We went 87 miles an hour upstream and passed every boat.
Dude, was it insane? Like, were you just, it's a new level.
Scared. Yeah, but the thing is, you don't realize how fast you're going because your cheeks are literally like on the floor of the boat. Like, your legs are straight and you're running and it's glass. You can feel like every riffle of the water on your cheeks as you're running down 87 miles an hour. Terrifying.
That is crazy.
Yeah. It's literally a potato chip.
Me. Steve is self-voting himself.
That's fair. You have to always have that confidence, right?
The serious move of the week right there.
Yes.
Ben, I think you would really enjoy a conversation with this guy. His name is Dean Meckes. He's a guide on the St. Lawrence River. Taught me a lot about the St. Lawrence. The way he kind of approaches smallmouth is super interesting. And I'm really trying to get him on the show. And I think what we're trying to do is I'm traveling with Destin for the Opens, and we're going to St. Lawrence. We're actually going to stay at his house, try to make like almost somewhat force him to come on the show.
Like, hey, we're doing a live tonight, by the way.
While we're sitting there, I'll just pull up the podcast and be like, oh, yeah. So start talking to Dean and see if he even notices that he's on a podcast.
Yeah, it's hilarious.
But no, he's a really, really good dude. He guides on the St. Lawrence in the summer months and then fishes like Florida Okeechobee stuff in the winter. He's like one of the snowbirds.
That's so cool.
Yeah, lives the life. But just a really interesting question I had. That's all it was. Just want to see.
Man, I wish. I run into this decent bit. Is my network is so small around here. Like, there's not that many guys that fish the lake that I fish. That it's one of those things. I'm torn between like. There's no one really to share information with. There's just not like. So I don't have the network to share it with, and I'm always like ripping my hair out. Like, what the hell are these fish doing? It drives me crazy. It does. It drives me so insane because I don't have like the other local guys that can be like, hey, why is this not working? Like, why is what I'm thinking that should make sense not making sense right now? Right. Actually, no, I take this all back. I have one guy that I need to give a shout out to, Trent Masterson. Okay. No one probably has ever heard of this guy, but phenomenal, incredibly detailed angler, super, super underrated, but phenomenal fisherman. And I just started connecting with him in the fall of this last year. So
nice.
Well, maybe we'll have to connect and try to get him on the show. That'd be cool.
Yeah, he's
sounds very interesting.
Unbelievable fisherman.
Yeah, I would love to get Caleb Bass Quest up in the north for a while and see how he kind of breaks it apart because his philosophies are super interesting to listen to.
Caleb's brain works in different ways.
not human.
No.
So I'm looking forward to Friday with him and Rudd. I'm just going to sit in the back and just listen to Caleb talk. I think that's the plan.
He's so good.
Yeah, because you don't have to even ask anything. He just breaks it down out loud. He doesn't even
talks to. I don't know if he's talking to me or to himself, but dude will break it down, and I'm like, I didn't think of it this way. Like, I just knew that I was catching fish here. Like, for example, and then I'll let you guys go. We were fishing this river spot, and there's two rivers that flow in. I had been catching fish off of this current seam because this river had started pushing a little bit more water. And then all of a sudden, like, the bite started to slow down, and Caleb goes, I bet you that I'm going to catch one right here. And he cast it over into the other seam. And what had happened was this river had stopped. The other one had started pushing, and he noticed that there were some bubbles coming down the lake or some shit, and just started smashing them. And he's like explaining this in real time. He's like, dude, see those bubbles? Like, that means they're turning on the water upstream. And I'm like, I have no clue. Like,
what?
He's ridiculous, man. He's so good. He's so good. He broke down a spot that I fished for 5 years and like kind of thought I knew in like 2 hours.
Spectrum.
Yeah.
So, Ben, you're in what, Michigan, right?
Yeah.
So learn how to steelhead fish some of your streams that are hydro generated, so hydroelectric generated, the dams, and see how they pertain to current breaks on those dam streams, and it will teach you so much about smallmouth you won't even believe it.
Really? So like I have another buddy that steelhead fishes a lot. Phenomenal river fisherman.
Yeah.
I'm a terrible river fisherman. I'm so bad.
It teaches you all about like how they'll pertain to certain current breaks. Like when it comes to a river system, the fish will all set up the same in rivers because they're taking breaks from the current. They're using ambush points. So if you can learn how the water flows in like these rivers, you can go down to like a bigger river, say, let's call it the Detroit River. By looking at the bottom composition, you can almost see you can almost figure out where those fish are going to set up based on looking at your graphs in the bottom composition of how the current's flowing.
How much does current play for you guys on Erie? Or wind? More so wind.
Erie, a lot.
Because there's like you gotta think there's a natural flow because like Niagara's flowing into Ontario, so there's gonna
into Niagara Falls.
Yeah, so like the main lake, there's not gonna be a lot of current, but you gotta think that there's a natural flow. Yeah.
So do you look at spots and say, okay, this spot should be good right now because of this wind? I mean, like how much does that?
It's not even so much wind driven. On my end of the lake, I can almost figure out where they're going to be set up on the humps because of the current. So if I have certain wind, they're going to set up on it. Maybe not in this particular spot where I'm used to catching them. They might shift like 3 or 4 feet or, well, let's call it 15 yards to a different part of it based on the wind. But the current is so strong in relative term to like the rest of the Great Lakes where I'm at, because of the drawing power. So if I run down the river 6 miles, I'm going to fall over Niagara Falls from Buffalo. So like, or it's either 6 or 16 miles. I don't remember the exact amount.
Yeah.
It's so close. Like from where I can launch my boat and then I run out in the lake and make a right. We have the Peace Bridge, which connects Buffalo to Fort Erie in Ontario. And the current underneath there is 10 to 12 miles an hour in spots, if not faster. So there's this giant funnel effect where it slims down to a half-mile wide river moving at like 15 miles an hour.
That's silly, dude.
That's in Buffalo lies in the northeast of the way the Lake Erie lays, and the predominant wind is southwest. So literally the current is always pushed to my end of the lake. Always.
That's crazy. Like that's one of my big things is I fish the Great Lakes almost predominantly, almost exclusively. And like I'm still learning how fish are moving around based on just natural currents of the river that flows through, but also like the wind currents, the wind currents. So
right. Yeah. Well, I think that's it for tonight, fellas. You guys got anything before we sign off here?
I'm good. Before I give up too much juice.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have any closing notes, so if the folks don't have anything, I think we're going to call it a night. I can't close it out because actually I have the winner right here. Warren Beard is the winner of the second pack of Outdoorsman coffee. So Warren, if you're still on here, get in touch with us. If not, I will obviously try to reach out to you, get your contact information. We'll send you some coffee, dude. So congratulations. Thank you for
That's
sharing
awesome.
the Facebook feed. Guys, like we mentioned before, every Monday we're giving away 2 packs. It's always the same rule. Share it on Facebook or comment. Best comment's going to win. But as always, guys, we appreciate you tuning in. You guys have any last notes before we sign off tonight?
No, dude. Thank you guys for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thanks for spending 2 hours with us.
Dude, I love it. I love talking fishing. Like my brain just never stops. So thanks for having me on.
Heck yeah. As always, everybody, appreciate you guys tuning in. We'll see you guys next time.